This is the 31st year of The Economist's World In magazine, which brings together Economist in-house journalists, correspondents, but also a few celebrities, public figures. You can see up there on the masthead we have Sadiq Khan, Justin Trudeau, and George Clooney up there as well. But one of the interesting things that happens every year with the World In, when we release our cover, is instantly YouTube and Twitter are thrown into speculation about what it might all mean. What are the secrets hidden within this cover? What are we predicting? I think our cover last year apparently predicted all kinds of strange things which happened this year, which we had no idea about. So this year we've really gone full Illuminati Opus Dei on the cover. So hopefully they should be enjoying that as we speak. This is available in all good newsagents. It's best enjoyed in that form, in the glossy, enjoyable, more coherent form than you'll have from me today. But I'm going to run you through some of the top trends, hopefully which will be relevant to some of you as marketers and advertisers. But first of all, a small dose of humility from us at The Economist. I'm going to explore some of the things which we got wrong last year. First of all, this one just here, a fairly big miss there. We did say Britons would narrowly vote to remain. Instead, they narrowly voted to leave. A big miss there, but forgivable perhaps given some of the polls which were going on there. This next one is a little bit bigger, perhaps. Let's have a look at that. Yes, the GOP did not pick someone acceptable to party brokers and the traditional Republican mold. Instead, it was Donald J. Trump. Although we did say in our report that actually an outsider candidate could upset things and turn over the race. So in that spirit, bear in mind that these are all perhaps more food for thought, mind canapes, if you will, and a chance to think about what's going to be happening. And obviously, we embrace feedback. You may have seen my Twitter handle earlier on, LABlair1492. Please do tweet at me with your disagreements, constructive please, and we look forward to sort of hearing some of those. But to kick off, really some good news, really, in my 12 predictions for you for 2017. Next year, we're going to have some fantastic young people, all under, I believe, under 35, actually, in this list we've compiled for you, who are doing fantastic things. You might recognize some of the faces coming up on the screen already. On the far left, we have Joshua Wong, who some of you may know is part of Hong Kong's Umbrella movement, a sort of pro-democracy movement looking for more autonomy from China. We were emailing him, asking him to write for the report this year, for the magazine, and suddenly he went quiet for a few days. The deadline was approaching. We said, Joshua, can you maybe kind of file your piece for us quite soon? We then checked the news. It turned out he had been arrested by the Thai authorities. So there's a small excuse for him to not be filing on time there. Luckily, he was released, and he's written a great piece for us talking about his view of China and what it means for democracy in the region. You recognize a few faces here from the world of startups and tech. I'll mention, in particular, we have a really fantastic former Syrian refugee on the far top left who now lives in Canada, Hani Al-Mulia. He's also a great photographer and passionate about photography, 360-degree photography, all those kind of trends. Definitely someone to watch. We also have an amazing Chilean reggaeton artist called Tomasa Del Real, who's at the bottom left just there with that very attitudeful pose. Reggaeton, we think, is going to be a big musical trend next year. It's already big in the Americas. It's really a huge thing, and it might well jump over the Atlantic this year. Next year, I should say. You'll see Louise O'Neill there, sort of in the bottom and the center, a great writer of or young adult fiction, I should say, really taken Ireland by storm, and also going to be doing some sort of big things in the rest of the world as well. And a few other kind of interesting people. Boyan Slat, for example, you can see there. I'll point my laser at him on the bottom left. He is running a company called the Ocean Cleanup, which is looking at tackling the Pacific garbage patch through some very innovative techniques and technologies. So definitely some interesting young people to watch there. And if you want a full list of them, obviously they're in the magazine. You can also find me on Twitter, and I have a list of them there. So all of our top millennials for next year. For the 11, talking of failing or perhaps less failing unions, we have ASEAN, which will turn 50 next year. This is the regional organization of Southeast Asian states. And we really think this will be a key focus of the news next year. For one reason is the fact that China is becoming increasingly assertive in this region, particularly in the South China Sea, where it has several territorial claims. Also, we have the US increasingly focusing towards the Pacific region as a foreign policy objective. Donald Trump's election throws a lot of US policy towards the region into a degree of uncertainty. We've already seen that over the past week or so with Taiwan. So really expect ASEAN to be sort of in the news a bit more. And within some of these countries as well, there's some fascinating things going on. Malaysia, for example, is likely to have a small crackdown on the opposition ahead of elections either next year or the year after. In Thailand, some of you will know their king passed away, sadly, a few months ago. His heir, the Crown Prince, who's known for wearing mankinis and making his pet dog an admiral, I think, will now soon be in charge of the country, which will obviously add an interesting dynamic there for ASEAN. But the broader story will be, in this case, actually a union which works well. It moves slowly. They really don't like to rock the boat. Its members don't like to intervene in each other's countries. But in general, growth will be strong. Integration will be moving forward cautiously, and hopefully a success story amongst some uncertainty elsewhere. Just moving on. So here we have 10 business highlights for next year, which we've identified. I won't go through all of them. I'm sure you can pick up ones which you find particularly interesting from here. I will point out that one just there. We're looking at the US Federal Reserve lifting interest rates, probably actually this month, next week in fact, but if not then certainly then in December. So that will obviously mean less liquidity in the kind of global financial system. Other central banks will follow suit, and that will really have a lot of kind of underlying consequences for the world economy, which we'll explore a bit more in a second. Also, we have oil prices recovering somewhat, as they are already showing signs of doing. That will be good news for commodity producers, for countries like Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela to a certain extent. And we should say that we're also in the magazine, we're looking at Saudi Aramco, Saudi Arabia's state oil firm, perhaps running an IPO next year. So that will be of huge interest to businesses and corporates around the world. And finally, interesting one just here, we have mobile phone subscriptions soaring to 6.1 billion. As broadband in the developing world climbs. Anyone who's worked in developing world context, be it Latin America, Asia, or Africa, will see that smartphones, it's almost 5 a person these days. And personally, I can't really remember the last time I held a landline at someone's home. It still gives me the creeps a little bit to pick one up. I feel like I've been transported to 1990. So mobile phones are really going to be obviously bigger and bigger. Unlike last year, where we predicted that dumb phones would be the next big thing, it turns out only a few hipsters have got new Nokias. So smartphones are the way forward, it would seem. Next up, some elections to watch here. Again, I won't go through all of these in great detail, but first of all, occupying people's minds are elections in France and the Netherlands. We have sort of outsider populist candidates surging forward there. We've already seen Italy's referendum result in a no vote just at the weekend. Matteo Renzi has resigned, although he's going to be in office for the next couple of days at least while he sorts out Italy's budget. Italy may have elections next year as a result of this. And again, the big story here is the populists versus the insiders, the elites, whatever you want to call them. In these cases, though, we would sound a note of caution about expecting the Brexit and the Trump effect to sort of sweep through into these cases. For one thing, the contexts are quite different. Unlike in the Brexit vote, where it's a simple sort of majority vote, unlike in the US election, where you have the electoral college system changing the calculation a bit, whereby a small error in polls can actually produce a wide variation in the result. In each of these cases, they are a little bit more straightforward. In particular, in France and Italy, we're expecting the insider traditional parties to really gang up together and pool their vote to effectively deny Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders, with the great blonde hair there, a shot at office. Although I will take that with a pinch of salt. Maybe I'll be in front of you in a year's time confessing to getting that one wrong as well. We have elections in Kenya, in South Korea, in Iran, and also in China. It's the five-yearly, I should say, Communist Party Congress. And in this case, you'll see the President Xi Jinping tightening his power a little bit over China, even more so than he has done already. And really here, the story in many cases is of autocracy strengthening its grip. One positive story comes from Iran, which actually I think will be another great country to watch next year. They have elections in June or July, I believe. Hassan Rouhani, who's the more moderate, more reformist president, he will be sort of buoyed by the deal that Iran has made with the United States and the European Union over their nuclear reactors, and hopefully should be, well, it seems as though he will be getting another term in office there. So plenty of elections to watch next year to keep the pollsters still in business. Moving forward, this is number 8, or rather -8, which is likely to be Venezuela's growth rate next year. Again, this will be a country which we'll be seeing a lot more in the news next year. We're already looking at a situation bordering on hyperinflation this year, inflation of around 500%, a sort of generalized political and economic crisis. Broadly speaking, the left-wing Chavista government, which Nicolas Maduro, just here, is the president of, is sort of refusing to relinquish much of its control over power. The opposition have tried to put through a recall referendum to try and inject a bit more democracy into the country's political system, but it looks like that won't be happening. And it's possible that some sort of violent transition will be happening next year. The army are already in charge of food distribution. There's a general for rice, there's a general for sugar, there's a general for milk, and it may well be that they will be the ultimate ones that will step in and sort of restore some semblance of democracy to Venezuela. So it's a very sad situation, but what will be one which features a lot more in the news next year. This next one, again, some of you will be familiar with this. We've really been looking at 7 big waves of mergers and acquisitions since, I believe, the late 19th century. Next year, the current wave of this will probably come to an end. Since 2012, we've had about 18 trillion worth of M&A kind of transactions going on around the world. A huge wave of deal making whereby companies are consolidating, buying up rivals, buying up a larger share of the market share. We're thinking Dow Chemical and DuPont, Kraft and Heinz, AB InBev's purchase of SAB Miller, which means next year they will be selling 1 in 3 bottles of beer drunk around the world, which is a huge share of the market. Next year, this will come to an end for several reasons. First of all, governments, regulators are getting a little bit wise to the idea that actually having these huge corporate monoliths might not be good for growth and competition. So expect to see more legislation trying to break up some of these corporate giants. Another reason behind this, is also the character of governments. Theresa May here in the UK has said she might try and stop some foreign corporate takeovers of certain key industries. And also a general picture of globalization going backwards will really serve to frustrate some of these bigger deal-making initiatives. I expect to see smaller companies. The smart money, though, will be in Europe, because obviously a way to kind of counteract a lower growth situation, a loss of market share in Europe will be, after next year, trying to form some larger European champions. So look out for that. I'll keep on going quickly. Next year will be ripe with revolutionary anniversaries. Some of them you may have already heard about. We have 500 years since Martin Luther famously nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Württemberg. We have 50 years since Sweden changed driving from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, which is a very historic anniversary, believe it or not. I encourage other countries to do the same. And we've been thinking a little bit about what other forms of standardization might take place. For example, you travel, you know the feeling, you go to your hotel, you get out the various plugs and adapters you've brought with you, turns out you haven't got the right one. Could next year be the year we finally get a universal plug for every country? And perhaps next year we might have metric rather than imperial adopted around the world. We can only dream. Enough of your ounces and pounds. another guy I just want to point out here, this chap is called Carl Dreiss. He actually invented, he invented an early form of the bicycle, perhaps the first form of the bicycle. He was born 200 years ago next year in Germany. And as you can see, it's not exactly how we'd recognize the bicycle today. You sort of have to straddle the frame and kind of shuffle forwards. So if any advertising executives here want a good campaign for next year, try getting some Hamburg hipsters on some of those and getting them trying to move. I'd watch that advert. Next, we have 50 years since Che Guevara was killed in Bolivia, which again will take on added poignancy just given the passing of Fidel Castro last week. What else do we have? We have 100 years since the Russian Revolution. Expect Vladimir Putin to struggle a bit to reconcile his own Tsarist or Stalinist ambitions with commemoration of Vladimir Lenin in Russia. And we have 10 years since the iPhone, which of course will spill a lot of ink, a lot of discussion about Apple's direction in the future. So the next thing we want to talk about is the kind of the jobs of the future, really. Some of these you may not have heard of. There are two ways, really, you can try and work out what we're going to be doing for jobs in 5 years' time, or a year's time, or 100 years' time. One is to look at the data. On the left, you can see stats from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. They helpfully, every 2 years, compile a list of the fastest growing jobs. As you'd expect, we can see wind turbine technicians up there. We can see a lot of jobs associated with the kind of care of the elderly, home health assistants, personal assistants. Those things will obviously keep on growing. But you also have to be a little bit more creative and think, where are the jobs going to come from which aren't growing right now but will need to happen? So first of all, we thought, well, if you look at companies, look at what they're doing with the chatbots, you go onto Vodafone or wherever to complain, and you're there talking to a chatbot, someone needs to program these. Someone needs to kind of tell them what to say, to tell them some good dialogue. There's some rumors of Silicon Valley executives getting comedians and writers to come in and even give their chatbots some good one-liners. So that could be a good growth area for jobs in the future. Obviously, we have drones being used more and more in all kinds of different capacities, be it agriculture, humanitarian aid, business, deliveries. Obviously, drones aren't perfect. They crash, they break, and they will need someone to fix them as well. So expect that to be a good job for the future. Think about this one, virtual fashion designers. We've seen a bit of augmented reality already being used this year in some popular apps. Imagine going into a department store, instead of having to get changed in the changing room, the assistant can be there with an iPad or some sort of screen and just show you what the clothes would look like on you already without having to get changed at all. Much more rapid way of doing things and should save partners, husbands, wives, time spending outside changing rooms waiting for their loved one to try on the 5th outfit in a row. Indoor farmers. This one kind of refers to the sort of growth of urban agriculture, really. Thinking about sort of, hydroponic food production, which uses, rather than soil, using sort of water-based solutions, aeroponic agricultural production, using sort of air-based sort of static food production. These will need technicians to make them work as well, to create the sort of food of the future. And finally, we're thinking about the combination of 3D printing with personalized tech, personalized biology. Someone kind of being able to kind of print these 3D organs of the future. That could be a good growth area to start training up in. 4 ways in which tech is getting personal. This will be the other big trend next year. Tech really adapting to its user and having personalized solutions for various aspects. Personalized medicine, obviously, is an important aspect of this. Gene therapy, liquid biopsies, especially genetically modified T cells. These are all things which will feature next year. This one, we're thinking about sort of what's kind of called quite glibly often in some contexts, robot psychiatrists. A lot of great studies have been done in the US whereby robots have been able to pick up on the telltale signs of depression, voice intonation, facial tics, these sort of things which actually need a way of being quantified and captured in a more empirical way than just your run-of-the-mill psychologist, who will obviously always have a role to play in these kind of cases, but getting a sort of a degree of data collection there is also going to be useful. Virtual reality, I think in a way, this was the year of virtual reality in gaming. I think a few of us may have had the Pokemon Go over a few months over the summer. But I think next year will really be the year of virtual reality in movies. The Tribeca Film Festival have a category next year allowing for VR films. There's lots of funding available for these kind of new projects, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of these as well. And finally, personal assistance. Again, we've heard about some of this already over the past past day or so. So I won't talk too much about those, but really I think that will be another big growth area as well. And I think the question about robots stealing our jobs, that perhaps shouldn't be the worry. More robots taking our data and doing interesting things with them. One big worry will be if you're using, say, a virtual secretary on your phone, which company do they direct you towards? One which their parent company has a relationship with, or one which you know, or the cheapest one? There are lots of kind of dilemmas there which will need to be solved and ironed out. I'll press on. We have some interesting economic trends next year. I'll just deal with the first one on the right, just here. What we might see next year, rather than companies taking a long time to pay their tax, and sort of companies really hanging on to their money for as long as possible, companies actually rushing to pay their taxes. This is because if you look at interest rates in the developed world, particularly in the European Central Bank, where rates are now at minus 0.4%, it actually now costs money for banks and therefore corporates to actually store money in banks. So we're looking at companies spending their money a lot more quickly. And also, if this gradually filters down towards consumers, we may even see kind of clients being asked to be paid in non-currency format or non-cash format. Think about a freelancer being asked to be paid with an Oyster card, for example, with £100 already on it. If it actually costs money to store your cash in banks, the other ways of payment will be growing a bit more. Next up, two big statistical milestones. We have next year output from the EU for the first time being less than half that of the developing countries in Asia, obviously excluding Japan, Australia, etc. Really a big milestone and showing the sort of tilt of the global economy towards the east. And again, part of that is longevity. Next year we might see Singapore rising in life expectancy above France. So all those fine French wine will only get you so far, unfortunately. So really two kind of emblematic trends for the kind of global economy there. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have one Donald Trump. What to say, really? I think we're still in very much uncharted territory with Donald Trump. A lot depends upon his policies as they emerge over the next few weeks and months. I think one thing to bear in mind, one key thing to talk about is the Supreme Court. Obviously, he'll be appointing a more conservative judge to the vacancy on the Supreme Court, and that will have consequences for legislation across the board. Obamacare may see some tinkering, although it seems now that he feels quite positively about it, which is great. Domestic demand in the US might well surge. He's talking now about corporate tax being cut from 35% to 15%, which is a huge cut. And that will have consequences, not least for the fiscal deficit, but we could see in the short term a surge in consumer spending in the US there. The bigger consequences really are international. We're thinking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's now dead in the water, although China will be stepping into the gap left there. Just the week after the election, Xi Jinping was in Latin America trying to sort of resurrect really a larger trade deal, which will include China, unlike the TPP. So really, we're thinking about Russia, we're thinking about China, Iran to a certain extent, stepping into this vacuum left by the US. Some of the more hair-raising domestic policies, the deportation of 100 million migrants, are unlikely to materialize. But I think it is fair to say that for many, next year the US will be a less welcoming place. So that is everything from me. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, feedback, criticism, ideas for next year. It's been a pleasure to speak to some of you, and I'm sure I'll be here next year full of admission about what we got wrong, and hopefully some of the things we got right as well. Thanks very much. Thank you.